So I want you all to meet my friend Amy. Amy is here to talk about something particularly interesting that will be up on the screen in just one moment. But a little bit about Amy. She is actually descended from computers. I don't know if anyone knew this about her. Her grandmother's job title was computer in an MIT lab. And I want that job title desperately. I'm going to talk to my boss after this about changing my job title. You heard it, Tim. I'm computer. That's officially New Relic computer. That's me. Thank you for the idea, Amy. So Amy is a healbot, fond of role-playing games. Talk to her about assorted nerd things in that realm. I love a good healer. And we are about to hear something very interesting. Thank you. A round of applause for Amy.
Awesome. Well, thank you, guys. My name is Amy Unger, and I have done a lot of software estimation as an engineer. When I entered the field, I did not expect this to be part of my job, nor did I expect it to be a key metric of whether the work I did was considered a success. As a consultant and also as a staff member, I've worked with teams that produced accurate estimates and been on teams that produced estimates that were way off base. So today I'm going to talk a little bit about, if I can get my mouse back, well, maybe not. Today I'm going to talk about some estimating games that we should all not be playing. You should be able to scroll with your fingers over here. Yeah, you would think, and that was what I was able to do this morning.
There we go, and now you can scroll.
Thank you, Jonah. Jonan. So, luckily there are no names in this presentation, so I won't be flubbing anything like that. Along the way, I'm going to give a short introduction of why estimating helps our project succeed. I'll talk about the ways we estimate and our existing vocabulary for talking about our process. Then I'll introduce a compendium of bad estimation games and wrap up with some thoughts on more accurate estimating. So why do we estimate when it's so tough to get right? At best, estimating seems like an organization's process of being increasingly less wrong about how long work will take. We want our communication about the future to go from something like this, maybe something like this, to something that looks like this if we're in a agile-ish workplace. So these numbers would represent the comparative work that would be needed to complete a chunk of work. So a 2-point story would be twice as much work as a 1-point story. And finally, we'll possibly want to get to something that looks a little more like this. But that date can be so wrong sometimes. What's the point in doing it all? Well, as programmers, we do it to get enough information into the hands of the people we work with that their business or organization can be run successfully. Put another way, given that we intend every piece of software we work on to be beneficial to our employer or our clients' end mission, and ultimately to our users, we want our success does depend on our coworkers knowing enough to make those time-sensitive decisions that make our product work. What features we deliver that will have the most value to our users varies based on how long they'll take. So a calendaring feature, for instance, might be a great investment if it takes only a week, but a really bad one if it takes a whole year. In addition, decisions like when to hire a new developer or when to launch the marketing campaign can't be made without knowledge of when we might finish our work. And just like programming takes time, marketing and promotion campaigns have a long lead time. Which is why we often need to deliver something as valuable as this, which can turn into something as problematic as this. There's only one character difference here. You wonder why it's such a big deal, right? But even if our estimates do turn into pseudo-deadlines, that's no reason to ignore the power of estimation. Without that estimate, the people who shepherd our products to our users wouldn't be able to make decisions today that impact August. And sometimes that's the difference between the success and the failure of an entire business. And that, of course, sets our projects up for failure. So in addition to providing a timeline, estimating also improves communication about the work we do. It allows everybody to make better decisions. So for example, we might be looking at the most beautifully written, most spec'd out feature in all of creation, with comps so clear they could make a programmer cry. We can visualize already how users are going to interact with this application. And from the feature requester's point of view, they might say, well, this is a house. It's pink, it's got some nice little red flowers, and it's like all the others on the block. And yet it's only when we start estimating that it becomes clear that what we're actually building, if we're building something that's exactly like everything else on the block, is the Starship Enterprise. Because of course, the stakeholders' pink house with red flowers is going to fly. I mean, where else are they going to raise their children but the final frontier? Everybody else's houses fly. So in the same way, if we're talking about a nice little story where we restructure some payment forms for usability, adding a few small features that all other competitors have, we might also, at the same time, be talking about a massive feature with back-end rewrites, since, of course, we roll our own payment processing. That's a good idea, right? And of course, we have to integrate with ancient accounting and tax software. Estimates are a good way, then, to communicate the scope of the work required. They clearly signal that if you want to build your pretty little pink house with red flowers on top of the Starship Enterprise, that what we're building for you is the Starship Enterprise, and oh, by the way, a nice little house. So I've talked briefly about how valuable estimating is to the products we build, and now I want to talk about how we estimate and our vocabulary for talking about estimating. So the estimation process is different in every workplace I've worked at, and I'm sure we have a bunch of different processes represented today. As all of my work has been done in small a agile workplaces, this part reflects that frame of reference, so pardon me if this does not reflect your experience, but the rest of the talk will. On the teams I've worked on, we try to talk first about size and not time. It's really far easier to have a constructive conversation about the amount of work to be done than it is to have a conversation about the precise time it will be completed. A corollary to this is that we want to use comparative estimates and not absolutes. We want to say that this story is a 5-pointer because it's larger than the 3-pointer we're working on right now, but it's also about the same size as the 5-pointer that somebody else just completed. As humans, we are far better at saying this thing looks like that other thing than we are at saying this thing is 100% absolutely this thing. Whether we have to determine whether one thing is absolutely small or absolutely massive, or whether it's absolutely a dress that is blue and black or absolutely white and gold. Next, we want our process to emphasize historical performance and not guessed timelines. We want to be able to say that historically this team has completed 45 points in 2 weeks, and not that we think this chunk of work will be completed by the end of March. Even if those two statements actually end up with the same consequences, we want to be looking at historical data, not at guessing the future. And finally, we want our process to include times for discussing how to improve estimates, not recriminations for missed deadlines. So if a 2-point story ends up taking about as long as a 13-point story, and that happens consistently, we want to take this as an opportunity to learn about how to improve our estimates, not to say everybody needs to work 80-hour weeks from now on to infinity. So when we talk about how to bring these goals into a reality, many of our processes descend from this game of planning poker. Planning poker might be somebody's ideal of how estimation happens. And so the rules end up being pretty rigid. So a moderator runs the meeting, and each story is introduced by the moderator. Everybody has a chance to ask clarifying questions. They come up with an estimate on their own, All these estimates are revealed simultaneously. Our high and our low answers talk. There's a round of discussion where you can ask questions, ask why you estimated high or why someone estimated low. And then you repeat rounds of estimation until you get something that looks like consensus. But because this is relatively rigid, it ends up, our processes often end up deviating or starting from a place that's completely separate from this, even though a lot of them look a lot like planning poker. We've added a bunch of house rules or we've just taken a whole bunch out. Still, this game is a key part of how we often talk about what good estimating looks like. So how do we talk about the weird, uncomfortable moments if we don't have the structure that used to be there? Without those rules, our teams don't necessarily have a way of circling back and checking in with ourselves about how our processes are going. We can't say, hey, you just broke a rule, right? We have to talk and make up a vocabulary about talking about weird dynamics that can start creeping into our workplace. So I wrote this compendium of bad estimating games as a silly way for a team I was on to begin talking about how we estimate. And so having talked about why and how we estimate, I'll jump right into the compendium of bad estimating games that we may all have played at one point. So, Solitaire. Solitaire is when one developer estimates work by themselves. Don't do it, right? Seems pretty simple. Just say no. I think it's pretty commonly accepted that we should have a few people looking at requirements before we decide on an official team estimate. And we've all had times when someone, whether during or outside the estimation process, thinks of a tough challenge that we forgot that we would face when implementing this feature. And that knowledge leads to a better estimate. But it's really hard when you run into someone in the hall or you're on a phone call, and in passing someone mentions a feature. Hey, that form field story coming up, that won't be too long, right? Maybe a 2 or 3, it won't go longer than a day, right? It'd be great to have that by Thursday to show to accounting. And the problem is, to the best of our knowledge, that is going to be an easy story. And in that moment, your mind is dropping that part of, to the best of our knowledge. I mean, you know it's an easy story, right? It's just a new form field. And of course, it would be helpful to your project manager, your client, coworker, business analyst, what have you, if they knew that it was likely they could show it off on Thursday. So it's really easy in the spirit of collegiality and your own confidence to say, yep, that'll be a quick one. And all of a sudden, the story is officially a 2 or 3. So let's play a little charades now. I'm going to play the business role, and at the end, you can estimate the story that I am presenting. So. Somebody got it, shopping cart. All right, how many people want to estimate this story, guys? Clearly, I just gave you some great specs, right? Somebody in the audience? 50? Probably an accurate estimate. So charades is when you don't have enough information to reliably estimate. Now, your project manager probably isn't miming shopping cart to you, right? But what if I'd said, log in for a small Reels app? I've been on the wrong side of that debate, and that debate was one with the words, we'll just use devise. Now, if you've been on a project for a long time, it's really easy to think that everybody is on the same page. And the reason why everybody was fine with, we'll just use devise, is because we were thinking, hey, login for this app should be pretty similar to most apps. We just need to support some basic logging in, basic features that we're all familiar with. And the problem there is that previous discussions about the application and assumptions about typical user experiences can stand in for story details. And we often don't know that what we're delivering isn't what is wanted until the last minute, when it's almost ready to deploy. So if the acceptance criteria or the specifications or the comps aren't clear or don't exist, this story is not one that should be estimated right now, because no team can possibly accurately estimate what it doesn't know. Charades has a sibling, and that's Dummy Bridge, where to play a 4-person game with 3 people, the 4th person's hand is played open face. We do this when we move forward with estimating without the right people present. We essentially speak for that person. And the problem is, if someone needs to be there, they really need to be there, especially if they're the ones who will end up doing the work. Now, if your team is like mine, we're supposed to share responsibility for the entire application. Anybody can pull any story, roughly within the same domain. And that can lead to the assumption that anybody can estimate any part of the application. And the reality is that most teams do end up with areas where at least one person is far and away an expert. And if that person is not available, that story should not be estimated without them. Slot machines. Slot machines is where your team's estimates are not revealed simultaneously. So slot machines themselves could have been built to reveal all values at the same time. They really could have. It might have been even easier. Instead, slot machine builders chose to make each wheel stop one after the other. It builds suspense, and it makes people feel that if they got 2 in a row, well, maybe the 3rd one's going to go. I'm going to win big now. Unfortunately, this is a bad thing for teams doing estimation. And it's easy to think that we're comfortable enough disagreeing with each other that we can take shortcuts, especially when they speed up the process. And whether that shortcut is explicitly asking senior people to give their opinions and estimates first, or not calling more vocal members not calling them on the fact that they're giving estimates before the discussion is actually over. It's easy to think that, given that we're a relatively open team, people will speak up. But even among very egalitarian teams, where everybody really does feel empowered to take on anybody else, if they feel justified that they have a point to make, I've seen this have effects. It's especially apparent when someone says, "So, what do we all think?" And half the people interpret this as a signal to reveal estimates, which they do. And the other half think that it was a signal for more discussion. And they look furtively around the room real quick, and then they quickly come up with estimates. It won't surprise you that most of the people who lagged have chosen as their estimate the average of the speedy estimators. Well, why? Well, sure, they've seen everybody else's estimates, but also, the people who tended to think that the leader's question was a prompt for more discussion are likely the ones who continue to have concerns or questions. And they can start to feel out of place when they see a lot of people confident in estimating without that extra information that they feel they need. So they discount their own views and look for clues from the colleagues they see as clearly more informed. Now, I know it can save time, and it doesn't feel as rigid. But playing slot machines when revealing estimates really does cause you to lose valuable perspectives. Blackjack, my favorite one. Estimation Blackjack is where if you go above everyone's estimate, you're out. So I found this is a common experience when a manager chooses to involve themselves in a discussion. Or on the consulting side, on client projects when we work alongside employees of client companies. When you're playing Estimation Blackjack, it can feel like your high estimates single you out from the project manager and the client team. I mean, how could something that simple take that much work? They've taken a look at the code and that's there and just needs to be ported over from another language and all the business logic changed. It's not more than a 2-pointer, right? So how do we get into this situation? Well, I've seen a lot of differing incentives and consequences as an employee and as a consultant. For employees on staff, I rarely have had any consequences when I estimate too low. I haven't been fired. I often haven't even had a single one-on-one talking to. When your estimate is too low, the group gets together, somebody takes some heat, and by and large, the team as a whole takes a lot of heat. But you're not yelled at, and at the end of the discussion, you shrug, your boss shrugs, and you say, that's the nature of software. On the other hand, if you estimate too high as a client employee, you risk not as a client employee, as an employee on staff, you risk not getting the chance to do the work at all. It's going to take how much time to improve that code? Oh no, company does not have time to afford that. You can make do with what you have. Are you telling me that what you've written is not quality work? And so as an employee, I'll estimate high if I feel like it, but I'll walk that back the minute I see any resistance if I believe strongly that this is work that should be done. As a consultant, however, the incentives and consequences are reversed. As a developer at a consulting company, I usually saw chunks of work that had already been contracted for. So the company, our clients, had already decided to fix that code or to improve it. They'd already negotiated a contract with us, or we were estimating to make sure that the contract was a good fit. Now, likely I've been very lucky, but I never really saw any benefit in the long term to estimating far too short. Because the disincentive to estimating short is to have the story turn out to be bigger than we estimated. The client feels cheated, and they feel like they're getting less for the hours they bought, and they feel like we've missed some deadline. And they don't have the experience working with us to trust that we are working as hard and as efficiently as possible. So where you and your boss might be able to shrug and have a common software kind of moment, you don't have that common rapport with a client, and so the discussion gets very hairy very quickly. And so we get estimation blackjack, where if I estimate too high as a staff member, we risk not getting the go-ahead to do the work. And if we estimate too high as a consultant, the client is confused because their people are telling them it's easy because they're motivated to. And as a staff member, you end up with unrealistic estimates. And as a consultant, you end up losing the client's trust. Resistance. So resistance is a newer game compared to the ones I've discussed before. Resistance is a game of deception and spies, where a group of people are trying to launch a resistance against an evil military occupation. So the spies are trying to undermine the resistance. If you've played Mafia, it's somewhat similar. But for our purposes, it's a game of talking and convincing your teammates to agree with you. Sounds like an estimation meeting, no? Well, some friends loved this game, and they wanted to find a way of getting better at it. So, scientific people that they were, they had one person sit out for the game and watch the game proceed. Freed from any allegiance to one side or the other, this person was able to observe the game and find people's tells and see how people interacted. And they were able to get a lot of people to improve their communication. Some might say lying. We'll say communication. And everyone's tells and giveaways were identified and corrected. The funny thing is, at that point, the spies started winning all the time. So the question was put to the neutral observer, why is this happening? Everyone is getting better at communicating, but the randomly assigned spies win every time. And it turned out the answer was simple. The spies were just talking more. Before each decision the team had to make, everybody would start out talking roughly equally, taking into account personality differences. But after 2 to 3 minutes, the conversation would end up being dominated by the spies and just 1 or 2 other people. The bulk of the group stopped talking. So why was this? Well, each spy begins the game with a single, simple imperative. I must convince everybody in this room that I am not a spy, even if I am. The resistance members, however, start only with the general motivation of wanting to see the group's decisions lead to successful missions. So the people with a clear motive to talk simply talked more because it was easier. It came more naturally. And with more airtime, their opinions carried the day. So let's think about that. People who have a clear motivation, or even a simple, clear idea to express, even something so simple as, I am not a spy, will find it easier to speak and to argue for their point. Consider how hard it is to explain why you think a feature will take a long time to implement. Your gut feeling of, well, this touches a lot of different areas of the application, is hard to concretely justify. And it's really hard to stick to your guns about uncertainty. We humans just don't like it. Our brain does all sorts of things to impose a logical order on the world. To say, that story looks big, I don't know, but user authorization for that class is always hairy. That can take guts. Just the words, I don't know, can be tough to say in a professional environment. Sticking to your guns in the face of someone saying, it will be a small change. I think we've done this before easily. There's nothing I can think of on that class that will cause conflicts with this change. Sticking to your guns in that situation can be tough. What are you supposed to say? I just don't know. You've said that already. What society expects you to say is either, yes, that sounds exactly correct. I now know exactly what the challenges are, and I'm happy to move forward. Or, no, that is wrong. These are the 5 things that will conflict and that will be our challenges, and I now can identify each and every one of our challenges, and I'm happy to move forward. That's how debates are supposed to happen. We're supposed to be debating facts, not uncertainty. So the problem in estimating becomes that the people who have facts that they want to talk about can more easily dominate the conversation than people who have broad concerns. And that can end up driving the estimate. So, I've talked about Solitaire, where we estimate by ourselves, charades, where we estimate without the information we need, dummy bridge, where we estimate without the people we need, slot machines, where we bias each other's estimates, blackjack, where we push our own estimates down, and resistance, where we drown out uncertainty. I'd like to conclude with some thoughts on moving towards better estimates. So the first thing I'd like to say is to treat it as part of the job. We've all heard from people in our workplaces and in the community who think that every minute not slinging code is a waste of their time. And there are times during boring meetings when I've felt my time wasted too. Ultimately, though, unless you are the sole CEO, CFO, sole marketer, sole programmer, and sole project manager for your company, likely estimation is simply about respecting the needs of the people you work with and helping you build a great, useful, and highly used product. On the other hand, though, it is important for organizations to be clear about what their needs are for estimates. As a consultant, detailed, precise, and accurate estimates were crucial for our communications with clients. We talked about that fact a lot. And so, when you were halfway through an all-day estimation meeting, yes, I said that right, all-day estimation meeting, you knew why it was important and why it was benefiting your company. At my current job, the company I work with needs accurate but not precise estimates. We have 2 sizes for stories, big and small. I need to be correct when I say it's big or small. But this office does not need us to sweat the details about whether it's a half pint, bottle, bomber, quarter keg, half keg, or keg-sized story. And when we get into those decisions or those discussions, we know that we're off track, we know that we're wasting time, and we get back to programming. Respect uncertainty. This is a big one, and we saw this in resistance. It's really, really hard to be certain about uncertainty. Now, the friends who played resistance fixed this one way. Each round of talking was limited to 2 minutes. This limited the time that the confident people, the spies, had to dominate the conversation after some people expressed doubts. And I think that works for what is ultimately an arbitrarily structured game. But time restrictions can feel arbitrary in a workplace. So unless this is a big problem for your team, I'd suggest 2 rules. The first is consider someone being unsure as a fact, on the same order as the other facts that people present. Facts like, I've seen this class before, we won't have to touch that part of the application, etc. And secondly, always take the high estimate if there's a lack of agreement. Investing in concrete discussions has always been valuable in estimates that I've been part of. Your estimates will improve substantially in accuracy if you take the time to make sure your estimation discussions are as concrete as possible. Don't be afraid to block stories for clarification. And try spiking on it. Especially in more casual environments, estimating a story might actually involve writing some code so that the technical requirements are clear. Having clear business requirements, knowing what error message needs to go on the page at what times, doesn't tell you much about how those error messages are implemented in the code and what files will need to be changed. Small changes can appear a lot bigger when you start looking at the code. Big changes can start looking smaller. A corollary to that is that spiking on bugs is especially important. If estimating bugs is important to your company, and in some situations it's not, but if it is, make sure you know what the bug is before estimating. We had a fun bug come up a couple weeks ago where the users were not able to register with email addresses that had 2 dots in them. So if you're talking about like james@bbc.co.uk or ishimoto@nhk.co.jp. Well, yes, the story included the .co.uk example, but the bigger problem with was with the .co.jp things. Shockingly, when we looked at our regex, it wasn't a problem with the periods. It was a problem with the fact that our colleagues in Japan were using 2-byte characters in their editors, which they should be, and then we're copying and pasting 2-byte characters for Roman numeral characters. And our regex has no idea how to validate something with nulls in every other byte. Spiking on that story allowed us to accurately estimate that as an almost 0 pointer, instead of looking at that and wondering what the heck could be wrong with our regex. Finally, sometimes we just need a breather from our current communication patterns, and changing up our process can help us improve. Trying some more structured conversations, even trying out planning poker. I actually have never played planning poker. I think it would be interesting, and I think that it can help bring out different dynamics in a team if they need to reset how they're communicating. It's also important that you say when you feel overly influenced as a way of just bringing up these issues. If your team's dynamics for estimating are off base, sometimes just talking about how your process is being influenced can help change that process. And finally, if it helps, maybe using some of these games, saying, hey, I feel like we're playing Estimation Blackjack right now, can be easier than actually having a hard discussion about what exactly is going on. So thank you. I hope this was useful, and I would love to continue the discussion. On Twitter, I'm CDWart, and I'd love to hear from you. Thank you.